like to call to order the special board meeting of Sheboygan Area Schools Board of Education for Saturday, February 17th, 2024 at 10 a.m. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. Mrs. Ballard.
Amber Hanson. Marianne Ridings.
Here.
Julie Lodula.
Here.
Matt Malarchuk.
Here.
Dennis Olson. Carmela Boyd. Tim Tarja.
Here.
Eric Hall.
If you'll please rise and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time I'd like to welcome Site Logic back. Thank you once again for joining us today, especially on a Saturday. The first thing, unless you have a different presentation, I'd like to review the PSA that you would like to go over. I know that board members had opportunity to review and then submit questions to you, so if you'd like to start, I'll hand that off to you and we can walk through that process.
Yeah, we were able to get all of the questions that were submitted and submit those and get those adjustments made. I know we've got one printed copy of, cause that one just finished last night. So I don't know, Brad, how do we want to go through?
So you gave us 3 additions or concerns, correct?
Questions.
I sent 3 or 4 myself,
Yep, and those are the ones we saw.
Okay.
And so we did reach out with leadership and they agreed to make those changes. So those have been made in this and updated.
Okay.
The other piece that we did in this, and I'm sure Spencer has forwarded on, I was just looking for them, that's why I was on my phone here. I know we talked, this is a conditional PSA, so it's going to change according to what our final scope is. But we've dropped the price down to 15 million now, and then we just figure we'll work our way back up if that's, I know originally we had that 22 million in there. I think that was kind of a, we didn't like to see that number, so we're starting this, we figure we'll start at 15 and work our way up. So if the scope ends up being 18.2, then we have to, but that's language is in this contract as well, based on final agreed upon scope is how that will change out.
So just for review for the other board members, some of the questions that I sent and I did not print it. One was on, there is a page, if you have the PSA in front of you. It was on page 13, remedies upon default. In Article 8.01, there was, if the district were to default, then Site Logic had opportunity if they were to present an action against the district to recover attorney fees. However, in Article 8.02, if Site Logic were to default, that same language was not there for the district to recover attorney fees if we were to present an action. So that is now included in your current PSA.
Yeah, and Pete's gonna try and pull it up on the screen.
Yeah, I was going back to.
Just so we can see the final. And we apologize, we were already up here in town last night when they sent us the final copy, so we were able to print one, but we didn't get a chance to. Is that the updated one?
Yes, this is the updated one. And I don't know, Marion, if you have like notes for pages, I can pull the language up and show you where those are.
Yeah, so this was Article 8.01 and 802 on page 13.
So 801 here on page 13. I wish we had the highlighted changes, but like I said, they just sent us it with the changes in it.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions regarding that?
The addition is the last line, including attorney fees, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
On page 15, the Article 10.05. It was environmental credits and tax deductions. That basically the work Site Logic did would allow them those environmental credits and any tax deductions. I requested that that be removed from the contract, as I just believe that those should belong to the district.
I have the same question as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's 10:05.
So can you talk to me about still the tax deduction portion of that?
Yeah, I believe, I thought the email that they were going to
Yeah.
remove that. Do you have that in? I don't see that. Right now, does that read the same as what it did, Kurt, before?
No, there was a paragraph that they did remove that talked about the
some of the
environmental credits.
Right.
But the tax deduction portion is still reflected in your new PSA.
Okay.
The question I'd have on that is, can you explain why it's typical that the consulting or the management company would be beneficiary to the environmental credits? Why, just why is that? Why, what is the typical rationale for that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have that exact answer. Obviously, our legal would be the ones to give that rationale. But I thought when that question came in that he said they were
Yeah,
going
they said they were going, yeah, I'm just looking at the correspondence.
to alter or change that.
I think the answer, Tim, would be to make money. For them to make money, that's why they want it.
Thank you, Matt.
It said, my understanding is that we will remove the environmental credits language and explain there are no environmental credits for this project. So,
But the environmental piece was removed, but the tax deduction piece, as you say, is still there.
So maybe if you could be the liaison to speak with them again regarding the portion, please.
No, 10:05?
My next question was really with, just some of the verbal presentations that had been given to the district to date, talked about compensation for services and, that if the bond wasn't passed, that there would be no expense to the district.
Right.
So I'm just looking for clarification on that statement, because in writing, and I'm trying to find you a page number.
Yeah, I think it was a statement about like referendum support services and what it mentioned specifically.
And that had a very limited scope to what those referendum support services were, but then that there was the lump fee of the $2,812,500. So what I'm looking for is in writing, what we're actually going to be responsible for outside of those referendum support services.
Yeah,
And that is on page 30.
yeah, outside of, I mean, there is, if the referendum does not pass, there is no cost to the district. There would be no cost.
So this
that-
paragraph does not reflect that though. The referendum support services, it says there in the large paragraph, second line, to include and are limited to, like providing that information for marketing, more marketing purposes to promote the project, and that those materials may include the architectural and design services. I took that to mean that the materials that are being provided to market include those designs, but this doesn't specifically say that all of your design work, all of your renderings, that those are going to be cost-free to the district.
Yeah, well,
Just any materials that you provide for marketing. So that's what I'm looking for clarification on.
yeah, I mean, from what our attorneys told us is there is no, I mean, referendum support services is kind of all-inclusive of everything we do up into the referendum. We won't get into actual design until the referendum would pass.
Okay, that was my
You know,
other question.
so everything we've done at this point has been conceptual, obviously, and we provided estimates, but the actual design really can't begin until the referendum would pass. The only exception to that would be if the district ever said, hey, we want to go in and get design started ahead of that, which most districts don't do, because then we would have to say, well, there's a cost to that if you wanted to do early design.
So if the referendum doesn't pass the first time, then is that extending on to additional referendums? What I mean is if after if we tried it in August and it doesn't work and the school board says, you know what, we want to part ways, how does this, is that it? So this just applies to the first referendum?
Yes,
not
this is only for the
first
first
one, okay.
referendum, yeah.
But part of the key thing in securing that referendum is having adequate definition so that we can appeal to the taxpayers, you know, to encourage them to accept it.
Right.
So it's like, how are we gonna get the adequate detail for the taxpayer so that they can have confidence when we go and ask them for a number for the referendum?
So adequate detail, I mean, we could provide everything conceptually about what those dollars would provide.
As far as scope and cost,
Yes, as far as, you know, definition of just exactly, not exactly, but more clarity on what they're gonna get for their dollars.
right,
What
we have to have that before we can even apply to the state. So this PQ app that we have to do in mid-March, that's why we have to narrow this down. They won't even let us apply until we have that narrowed down. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
I think we're on the same page.
Okay. I mean, and that's part of, you know, we're hoping today is we've got to narrow down exactly, the state wants to know exactly what you guys are going to do moving forward. So we would have those details.
That's a key word, is exactly, so.
Yeah. I mean, estimates, obviously.
Yeah.
We don't know the costs until we put the RFPs out and it goes out for bids. So, you know, we're not gonna know exact costs until once we start bidding projects. These are all professional estimates right now,
Mhm.
and the costs we give you. So,
You understand that we don't develop construction documents at pre-referendum stage. So it's really just programming, and that's it. There's still going to be, if and when the referendum passes, there'll still be a full construction document development process of schematic design development, and construction documents in effort to then get a good estimate bid, right? So we definitely have the experience of providing the state of Michigan and the materials to get the exact pre-referendum documents together, right? So meaning, for example, the 5 classroom edition with safe, secure entry, special education resource, you know what I mean? We can provide that and give you the square footage of those sort of spaces. That's the sort of detail. So when you say exact, I'm wondering what you're asking for.
And that's hard to define, but adequate information, so that if we have to go out and sell this to the public, what do we have to, not for our purposes, for their purposes?
Yep.
What are we gonna need to go out to sell them? That's what we're doing, right? We're selling the public on this project and the expenses associated with it.
Yep,
So that's where I'm coming from on the whole thing, so.
thank you.
Matt, you had emailed this morning some language that you emailed earlier.
I think what I was, and they might have addressed it, I had another additional question that I had sent earlier, but I think what I sent out this morning was related to, like, signing the agreement if we don't know yeah, I don't know if she got that one. Then I will ask that in a second, but I think what Mary Ann's referring to is something I sent her and Tim. Is if we don't know exactly what we want to partner with them on, like how do we sign the agreement saying this is what they're going to do? Now, it sounds like you guys have said that that part is open to either go up, you know, like you said, it's $15 million. Well, I guess it also could
or goes
potentially go
down.
down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess that partially answers that question, is that if that part of the agreement is variable until we decide, all right, these are the 20 things we're doing 12 of them with site logic, that's how much it's gonna cost, that's what it's gonna be. So I mean, to me, then that would address that question, I think.
Yeah, I
My
think,
question is just putting a dollar amount in there before we narrow down.
are you talking about, Matt, are you talking about, not everything that we're gonna do with bond money is gonna require drawings and a construction management?
Correct, correct.
So for those projects out of, if it's 15 million or 20 million, if we don't need those, like if Steve needs to replace something, right? Just a simple phone call maintenance, call a company, that wouldn't be applicable
Right.
for your
Right.
percentage of whatever, because we can do that on our own.
Right.
So how do you delineate between the work that we need an architect, we need, and the work that Steve can pick up the phone himself and say, come fix this, or come replace this, right?
Right, well, clearly, you know, this part of it is very amendable. All, you know, depending on the scope and the cost of the projects that you want to work with SiteLogic on, that's what this will be amended to reflect. Right now, you know, we estimated and we just put a $15 million placeholder in there. That can go up or down depending on the projects that you'd like to. But we will execute amendments once that scope is defined. And clearly in the contract, you want to define the scope that we are going to be assisting you in.
Right.
Now, I will add this, when it comes to the state and qualifying the bond, at the PQ meeting, they're going to require that every single dollar of that bond is in that PQ application. So we're going to have to identify the scope for everything. And if there's projects that you're like, well, we don't need help, we're gonna do this on our own.
Right.
And I'll use like buses as an example that we talked about.
Right.
You know, buying a bus, you don't need any help with, you can do that completely on your own. But we'll have to clearly define in the PQ application how much of the bond dollars you're gonna hold aside for busing, because Treasury's still gonna wanna see that.
I think Steve's done that.
But that won't be
That's what
part
this
of
email
this
is.
contract,
Okay.
because we're not going to assist you in buying buses. You're going to do that on your own.
Okay, yes, correct.
So
Yeah.
essentially, that's gonna be a part of the workshopping process, is determining what you guys would like to tackle on your own, as a part of that entire scope that we select, you know.
I want to switch over here real quick, because I did have some slides prepared. There it goes. I kind of address that as well. You know, and this is just kind of talks about, you know, really what are we trying to accomplish today? You know, is to help you reach consensus on what is the amount of the referendum that you want to ask for. We've talked about the tax neutral options, and we've shared a couple scenarios. But again, those scenarios, the 18-year and the 22-year scenario that were shared at the last workshop, you can go less than that, you can go more than that. You know, you could work with your financial advisors to determine what you want that. And you may not really want to answer this question until you decide what scope and cost you want to, because that might obviously define it. So you can really look at this process two ways. You can say, well, here's how much we're asking for, and let's choose our scope right up to that amount. Or you can say, what is our highest priority scope, and what are the cost of those things, and then do we need to work with RJ at PFM to make sure that he can develop a tax neutral scenario that allows you to reach those scopes. Does that make sense? Because really, you've got to select projects that fit into the amount, or you've got to select projects that then you work with your financial advisors to make sure you have the funding to cover those. And the 18 and 22-year scenario just give you kind of a ballpark of, if you were to extend your current debt levy for 18 years, this is what you could generate. If it's 22 years, this is what you generate. You know, the max you can ask for is 30 years. But you could ask for 25 or 24 or 17 or 12 or, you know, whatever it might be. And each of those scenarios would generate a different amount that you'd be asking the communities for in the referendum, which then provides an amount that is actually available for construction. So we talked about that a little bit at the workshop too, how that works. You know, this slide is really just to kind of update you on what we've done so far. We talked about that master planning agreement that we entered into with the district back in September. And that was to do all of these assessments and these surveys and any of these interviews that we've completed, and then provide you with, some estimates, some assessment information, looking at the financial picture and what options you have, and then workshopping to those budgets as we were just talking about. So we've really completed all of those pieces of that master planning agreement, and that's where, what's left to do is really preparing for a referendum. And that's different than this, and that's where that PSA is really, really important, because if you want us to help you go to referendum and complete the PQ application and do all the pieces that state treasury requires of the district, that's where that professional services agreement is critical. Because we've done a lot of work so far, but we can't go a whole lot further unless the district is committed to working with us through the referendum process. Because the PQ process is a really big process. We would assist you through every step of that. But in order for us to do the PQ application, we have to choose a scope of work. That's something that the district has to determine. And you have to determine what the amount of that ask is going to be, because those are all required pieces of the PQ application. We have to make sure for Treasury that every single dollar that you're asking your community for is accounted for in that application. It's got a balance to the penny, or else Treasury won't approve. And so there is some work to do, and that PQ meeting right now is scheduled for March 14th.
14th to 15th.
I mean, it's not too far away. And so that's where, again, granting us the authority to move forward with our work is going to be extremely important. Because without that, it's just, we're working for free. And we understand, if the referendum doesn't pass, we are working for free. But we need the district to commit to working with SiteLogic through that referendum process for us to continue working on developing scope and PQ applications and working with state treasury, and because there's a lot of work in that.
Pete, how does it work? What does it look like when, for example, if we're shooting for August, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say just for scenario, it doesn't pass, right? So there's no commitment after August if it doesn't pass. So if we wanted, do you find that most districts continue and sign a second agreement with you after it if it doesn't pass, and then try for the next election? But we know November is the next one, which is probably not
Right.
we're going to want to mess.
Yeah.
We'd be
Maybe
looking
May.
at May if it didn't
Right.
pass in August. So just if it didn't pass in August, what would that look like?
Yeah, and I will tell you this, because obviously having been a superintendent who's worked with, architects and engineers and construction management firms, there are those firms that will clearly in their contracts say, if it fails the first time, you're gonna work with us the second time too. That they make the district commit to a second attempt before that contract would be null and void. We're only asking for that first attempt. We're pretty confident that we can help the district be successful in that first attempt. If it wasn't successful, we would obviously want to sit down with you and say, okay, it wasn't successful, and let's try to figure out why. But then, if the district says, we'd like to go, let's say in May, and we'd like to kind of shoot for, have you help us uncover and answer those questions of why it wasn't successful, and we want to continue to move forward with developing a new plan or an updated plan, we would need to enter the new professional services agreement for it. So it is not binding the district in any way after the August date, unless we're successful. If it passes, you're going to work with us for the next probably 5 years as we work through each series and complete each project and each phase. That's what you would be committing to, is that we are your partner throughout that process until that process ends.
Maybe I'm missing something. I understand totally that SiteLogic should be covered for their efforts and their, you know, their investment in time and resources to succeeding here. The numbers that I see there, I can only look at those as being, they're strictly preliminary. So to enter into a professional agreement with those numbers appearing on there makes me uncomfortable, because they are just estimates. I would personally feel better about saying Site Logic, we are, up until something changes, we agree to work with Site Logic through this entire program, but we have to reach certain milestones that will help us establish what the, like for instance, percentages. Once we arrive at a better number of what this project's gonna take, then I would feel more comfortable being able to explain to someone else how we arrived at that. So if you guys have a percentage on what it would take to compensate Site Logic at that point, doesn't that make more sense than putting numbers right into the agreement up front?
That's how it's done. To be honest, those estimates are put in because that's the only way that I'm aware of that you can get some type of a binding contract agreement it clearly says, these are estimates, and these will be amended based on the actual scope and the cost of the program. Because you're not saying by signing a PSA that you are asking, well, the 15 million. You're not saying that you're asking your community for 15 million. That's still got to be determined. But what we are going to have to do by the time this PQ meeting happens on March 14th is we're going to have to hone in on exactly what you're saying. The problem, from our perspective, is this. If we, without an agreement with the district that you're committed to working with us, get you through this PQ application, get you all the way through it, so you are ready to go to bond, and there's no commitment on your part, what would then keep you from now taking all this information that we provided and going out and trying to find a different partner to say, hey, now the work's all done?
Yes.
Because someone will definitely do it for less when the work's all done.
Yes.
You know, and so that's why we need that commitment from the district before we go to the PQ application, because there's so much work in it.
Tim, I have a comment that might help ease some of your concerns. So when we look at professional estimates versus quotes, what we've provided right now are professional estimates. They're not quotes to say, yes, the work will be done at this price. So after PSA is signed, after we get a successful referendum, we then begin design and then bid out all of the work. The number in that PSA will then be amended based off of the bid results that we get from the design documents that have all of every single detail you could imagine. That's all gonna be bid out, multiple contractors bidding on it, and then the contract would then get amended based off of those bid results.
So the current PSA numbers that are in there, the 2.8 million and the 15 million, are only within the context of an estimate at the time. Those are just strictly an example of what it might be.
Right.
So,
Ballpark.
so is that clearly, is that clearly defined in the PSA right now that that's what those are?
And we cannot put a percentage in there. And easiest thing would be put 18.75%. Legally, and I don't understand that comes from our lawyer, we can't put that in there. We have to put amounts, and that's why it's written that way. And I don't know if anyone else knows.
Yeah.
But
I would, this first part is really very generic about the types of projects we could help you with. It pretty much encompasses everything that you could choose. But it's, we will furnish, a budget and design, to match the district's available budget. We estimate the total project is 15 million. That's just an estimate at this time. And we will execute amendments to the schedule to further define the scope of services and the work to be completed. So, everything is going to have to be amended in that schedule.
Okay, let's fast forward to the slide that specifically states the compensation that
Yeah.
Site Logic will receive.
The slide before Schedule B prior to that.
Right there.
Okay. Please explain this.
That number is 18.75% of 15 million. That's how that number is arrived at this point. It is simply an estimate based on that $15 million estimate.
But I think piggybacking on what Tim is saying, where you have estimate and proposed cost in Schedule C, Schedule B says the lump sum fee is, there is no wording that says is estimated to be or shall be based upon the actual overall scope of work as a final determination. This is a very straightforward, this is what our lump sum fee is.
Keynote one, right after that, $2,812,000, if you look right at the sentence on the very bottom, states that would be executed. Very bottom of the screen.
Oh, very
To
bottom.
the extent the lump sum fee increases or decreases, the party shall execute an amendment to the agreement.
And it also states clearly here, upon the proposed project scope of work and estimated project costs identified in Schedule C. So it clearly says this is based on that Schedule C $15 million amount that's there. So that amount will change, but that we are going to have to execute an amendment to this based on the scope and the cost of the work that we're going to be doing.
Essentially, what we're saying here is that Site Logic is gonna get their cut regardless, I mean, wherever we arrive at what the scope of this project is going to be, whatever we're at in August or whatever, and we have really good numbers, you're gonna get your cut, and that's rightly so.
Right. It's 18.75% of whatever construction costs we end up assisting the district.
Would it give any clarity to put in there that that's what this is 18% of the final cost, or were you talking, Brad, that there was a problem with using
Yeah,
percentages?
legally we can't, and I don't know why, but that was what because we've asked that before, and that's what the
We've been asked
lawyer-
legally to make sure you change it to an actual amount, not a percentage. And to be an amount of whatever is in Schedule C.
So if you were to say, 2.8 million or /18%, can you enhance the number by putting that in there, or is there any value in doing that, Matt?
I mean, I guess the way I'm looking at it is I don't know that I wouldn't, like, I guess, ask for it if it were my own. I mean, I'm comfortable with what it says there, that we can move up and down. I mean, I think they've been pretty, that was what was just going through my head before, is how are we going to figure that out? But being that it says that it's, basically, we're agreeing to work with them, and then we'll determine the fee based on what we're going to do, is how I'm reading it.
Pete, the assumption of this proposal though is that, based on the fee, is that the $15 million would require your guys' help for all 15 million right now. That's what the fee is based on, right?
Yeah,
Like we
this
talked
is-
about, if, out of the 15 million, if 2 million went for buses,
Right.
you would, so would you, excuse me, would you only, that fee would only be applicable to the 13 million that we needed.
So it would be
Right.
applicable to the scope of services and work that we do, yes.
Okay. So right now, but the assumption is that all 15 million possibly could need your
Could be.
help for all of it.
Yes,
And if it did, then that would be the total cost.
yes,
If it was less, then it would be less.
yes.
But I mean, I think they put 15 because we've been talking about asking for 22. And we also told them, well, yeah, but we've got these other things that we think we can do on our own. So I think that's probably why they
we
went with
did.
the 15 figure.
Started low and work up.
Because.
But
we
we're
told
not
them-
asking for more than 15 then, in this particular scenario. If we go to a PQ meeting, it's gonna be for 15, not for 22.
No, we have to
No,
ask for everything.
no.
We're just
Yeah.
only doing, we're just saying, we're just gonna, if we were asking for 22, we're just saying, we're estimating we're only gonna do 15 with Site Logic, but we're still gonna get 22 million, and we're gonna take that other 7 and do whatever.
So
We're gonna
the
do
additional
that.
7 would be for things outside of your
But
scope.
we still have to put it in.
Yeah.
Right. Our contract wouldn't include buses and whatever else, that would be in the PQ, but not in our contract.
Right.
And right now, so everybody understands, is that right now, if we did a tax neutral referendum in August, right now, our RJ, our bond professional,
Yeah.
has explained to us that we could go and keep our tax rate the same, and depending on how many years you go out, but we could have access to at least over $20 million, 22, 23,
Right.
to do all the things that we need to do, whatever that scope is. But you guys are saying 15 million of the 22, if we went for 22, is what we're talking about being applicable for your fee.
Yeah.
If it's 15, up to
Yeah.
15.
We put that in there right now as a placeholder, and because, like I said, last time we were high, and
Right.
so we just figured, let's start a little lower, and then we can amend it accordingly.
Okay.
My
So-
guess, and you guys could confirm or not confirm that, is that the 15 million comes from expected east side cost of expansion, because that wing was right around 14 to 15.
There,
So
we
is
didn't
that
have
where
a
you
strategy
derived
other
that
than
number?
dropping the
Okay.
number down.
All right.
That was all
It's
positive.
Well, that's what I
gonna
thought
get
was-
amended no matter what scope is selected. So
Right.
it's really just a placeholder. This is standard practice for any of the districts that we work with. We start with a blanket number, and then once scope is selected, that gets amended. Once bids are done, it gets amended again.
I could use a specific example, because Manton Consolidated Schools, which is about an hour or so south, they passed a $7.4 million referendum in November with us. And the original PSA said 7.4 million. And then once we got all the scope and everything defined, there was about $6.8 million worth of work that we were doing with them. So everything was amended to that $6.8 million number, and the fee was based on 18.75% of that work. Many times the initial amount is the ask of the referendum, just because that's an amount that we know. And we know the PSA will never be that amount, because there's always gonna be some issuance cost and legal fees and things like that that are gonna be deducted, from that amount once it's passed by your attorneys and your financial advisors, and you're not gonna pay us fees for that. So
So our homework is gonna be, once we know what the better numbers are on this, is our final bond request, our final referendum, whatever difference is, it's gonna be up to us to fill in the blanks with how that's gonna be spent, so that we can get the PQ.
yes.
Yeah, and I don't know if you got the email, Tim. Steve couldn't be here this morning, but he
Yeah, I
said,
saw that.
yeah, he's got a list of things
Uh-huh.
that he feels that he can do that would be part of this bond, but would not he could do it on his own. He wouldn't need the assistance of Site Logic. So that would be the whatever over the 15 million would be the list of things that he sent us.
Mhm.
And I don't believe that this was all encompassing list.
No, I think this was just a beginning.
Again, our original conversation, because we were looking at what PFM had supplied the district, and this again is just that 22-year scenario that generated about 20, that's why that $22 million number is one we talked about before, because that was one of those original scenarios that PFM had.
And we could go out to 30, right? 30's the max, or as short as like you were talking. Some people like to go shorter to pay their debt off sooner.
Right.
It just looks better, maybe to the community or
Right,
in your own personal life.
right.
But I mean, 22 is kind of that in-between number.
Mhm.
And again, the idea is that it's not a tax increase.
Right.
And when you ask for a tax increase, as we talked about many times, that has a 50% approval rate, whereas if we're asking, what we're asking for is just an extension of our current debt, that is a 90% approval rate, correct?
Right.
So what we need could, it could be, in this scenario, it could be 22 if that's what we needed, or it could be less, or it could be more.
Right. And, this other scenario was the 18-year one that he had shared with you. So there certainly are options. I would tell you that based on just our kind of analysis, and you would want RJ to be exact, but for every year that you extend your levy, you could probably generate, another $600,000 or $700,000 worth of, of dollars, without raising taxes.
Right.
So let's just say if you say, oh, we want to go out 30 years, well, you could probably generate $26–27 million, but that's something the district has to determine, is how comfortable are we with extending our debt levy?
Right. And I think that's the other thing, just to review, I think everybody knows, but we're currently, our last bond was approved in 2015, is that right?
Yep.
And we're coming to the end of it. It had 3 series. We're in series 3. We have $1.4 million left. We have 3 or 4 major projects this summer that is going to potentially exhaust or get close to exhausting that 1.4 million. The money that we're asking for in August, that money typically or truly wouldn't be available to probably the summer of '25?
Yeah, the way that RJ had put, and I'd have to go, see this slide here. You know, like the 18, the first series would be sold sometime in the fall of '24, and the second series would be sold sometime in '26. He doesn't have the exact date in there, it says 20 months apart. So, if it was to pass in August, you'd sell that bond sometimes in the fall of '24, which would allow you to get into design, but you're probably talking about some '26 construction at that point, you know? Just with the time that it takes to get through the design
Yeah, you got
process,
the design and go.
get everything out to bid, get your construction, everything, it does take some time. And I think the things that we're talking about today on scope is all 2026 pricing, right?
Correct, everything is estimated at construction year 2026, with the exception of, we shared a number for an elementary school addition at the main campus there, that was
Right.
estimated for 2027, but everything else is 2026 estimated construction.
Because you look at the construction, of these series, once you sell your bond, you've got 3 years to spend 85% of those funds. So if you sell this bond in the fall of '24, you'd have until 2027 to complete 85% of that work. Now, the other 15%, you can, quite honestly, you can hold that about as long as you want and do what you want with it. And if your bids come in really well and you have some excess dollars left over from the scope, you may be able to do extra projects that weren't even originally part of what you were planning to do.
So that was one of my questions, is there gonna be some language in there, like if we had leftover or excess money, then is there some sort of like general that then allows us to basically kind of pick what we wanna pick to use with that money?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I give it to, in my last district, we had a $56 million bond. And we got all the way through with our projects and we had about $2.5 million left. We built a new tennis complex at our high school. Wasn't part of the original PQ Act, but the money was left.
Okay.
And so at that point, the district gets to determine, okay, we have these funds left, what do we want to do with them? Because you've completed everything that was in your PQ application. So now whatever's left, you do what you'd like to do with those additional funds.
Okay.
As long as
there's language on some
Yes.
of the ask, remember,
Yeah.
that's kind of what
like bond counsel.
you guys have had
helps.
experience with
Mhm.
here, is as long as that language there, and they typically do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the language, usually the attorney's language for your bond is in a way that allows you to be able to, if there's an additional classroom you want to renovate, or there's an additional facility you want to, it allows you to do it, but you need to make sure your bond language allows it.
Okay.
Now, we talked about the possibility of having multiple series, like
Yes.
we currently have, because that
Yep.
extends the timeline, right?
Yes.
So if we did, how much time would we have if we went to 2 series or 3 series?
Yes.
How much more time would that give us to
Well, your series that you sell in '26, you have until 2029 to spend 85% of those funds. So that's where, you're talking about construction projects going on from, by the time you sell your bond in 2024, probably until 2029. And that's a long time frame. But yes, you could add, and this is something that RJ, if you wanted to add a 2028 series, or you could add as many series as you would like. That's just something you have to work with him on, how would we like to structure this bond?
Well, I think we should spend as much as soon as we can, because those dollars are worth less.
inflation?
Think of what our
Yes.
$3 million that we just got this summer would have bought us in 2016 and 17 versus would have
Right.
bought us in 2023. We've got a lot more out of it.
Right, and you mentioned the previous bond, was it 2015, I think, when that
I
bond was
think
passed?
so.
And if you'll notice, the yellow is your current debt levy, that expires after 2027. So what I'm guessing is back in 2015, you did a tax neutral at that point and extended it 12 years, right? So it was voted on in 2015 and it was going to expire in 2027. So now what you're doing is asking to extend this debt levy out until whatever year you choose.
I'm actually gonna refer to Sue in the back room because her husband, Ron, was an instrumental part of passing that first bond. Sue, was that a brand new bond to the district at the time?
Yes.
So it was
So
a brand new.
it wasn't an extension? Okay. So it actually established this current debt levy?
Can I ask a quick question, is that all right?
Yes.
So if you ask for like a 22-year or 30-year, does that mean then you can't renew until 30 years down the road?
No, what is very typical, and I'm gonna use this other example.
You can renew once they start tailing off.
Not once it gets to zero?
As taxable values go up, obviously it takes less mills to pay your debt. So over time, and these are all estimates from your financial advisor, but as taxable values increase, it'll take less mills to make those payments on your bond. So what happens is the amount of mills that you're levying goes down. And there would be opportunities, once you start going down, there'd be opportunities in any of these years to at some point do a tax neutral extension. Many districts plan that every 10 years or so, you're gonna look to extend your current debt levy because you can do that tax neutral and continue to maintain your facilities at a high level. And there are some districts that allow their debt levy to completely expire, like yours would in 2027. But then what they find is it's really difficult to reestablish that debt levy because it is a tax increase at that time. So that's why most districts look at these opportunities to say, if we can inform our community, this is just an extension of what we pay, that we're not asking you for any more than what we're currently paying to support our schools. But we need to maintain our facilities. And I think as Matt already referenced, things only get more expensive as time goes on.
I just heard in the news and just Traverse City is looking to
Yep.
increase their revenue to do some
Tax
180.
neutral, 180 million tax neutral, yep. It's large. They're a large district with a pretty large tax base.
Is that going to be tax neutral?
Tax neutral, from what I understand, yeah, 180 million tax neutral. And like, I think we talked about Boyne City. When Boyne City last did their bond, it was a tax neutral extension. Petoskey passed theirs in November, that was a tax neutral extension. We see, I would say the majority of bonds that we see are those tax neutral extensions because they just tend to make the most sense.
And most of the bonds that were tax increases failed most recently, right?
Yeah, in November, many more than 50% failed, yeah.
So at this time, I'd like to, been kind of beaten to it back there, but if there are audience questions for Site Logic or for the board, more specifically in regards to the partnership with Site Logic or bond questions themselves, maybe potentially not the scope of work at this point because we're not quite there yet. But I'd like to open it up to the audience if there's anyone that would like to ask any questions, or if you have any comments of your opinions of things, please feel free as well.
I guess one question I do have, since of course I haven't seen the paperwork in the board and Site Logic, is, so we are talking about the addendum that could be made in the event, of course, that the bond passes. Is there language in there that mentions this, like, that mentions if it doesn't pass, the payout is not there, things like that, and if it doesn't pass, based on the work that is done between Site Logic and the district, that their payout, again, it's a dollar amount, not a percent, I understand that concept, that amount will change. I'm just curious if in that PSA, that language is there.
So there is language in the PSA that if the referendum does not pass, that there is no expense to the district with Site Logic.
But I'm more curious if the dollar amount that was mentioned would go up, if there's language in there that it's based on the work completed.
As
Yeah.
the project's picked out, yes.
Okay.
So. Any other questions, comments, opinions? other questions or comments from the board? Is there anything else that you would like to add to?
I don't believe so, not from that perspective.
So going back, one of the questions that were asked previously, you amended the attorney costs. Getting ready to entertain a motion in regards to the PSA for Site Logic. So we do still have a paragraph in there regarding tax deductions that we would need to, if the board chose to include in their motion, that the PSA would need to amend that. If everyone is satisfied with the language in the PSA regarding the cost. Anything else?
I mean, the only thing that I would say, and I don't wanna keep delaying things and holding it up, would though be if our attorney has had a chance to review it, because none of us up here are contract lawyers or anything like that, that typically when you sign something that big, somebody that knows what they're doing for us, like, should look at it. I mean, we could, but that would just be my comment.
I did forward it to the attorney yesterday morning. I've not heard back from the attorney yet, so.
I don't know if we could put something in there, you know, we approve it pending our attorney's review, but I don't know how that would, if that's, would be feasible to put in there or not, like in a motion.
It would be dependent on what the attorney's review show. That would be my only concern.
Right.
Time frame wise, we have our regular meeting on February 26th. And I know that you guys have been extremely patient with us at this point of not signing on with you. I do think that Matt brings up a great point though, that should be reviewed and have feedback from our attorneys prior to signing. That would also give opportunity for your people to remove that paragraph and represent it to us. So
I will add one thing, I mean, here's where my major concern will come in, is PQ meeting is scheduled for March 14th. It has to be submitted to your attorneys and to state treasury at least like 4 days ahead of that meeting, so they can review it prior to the meeting day. So now you're getting back to like March 10th. It takes a lot of time to prepare the PQ app once scope and everything has been determined. So I you know, again, the district needs to do what they need to do to make sure you're confident moving forward. But I am concerned that meeting the requirements of the PQ application on March 14th may not be possible if the district isn't considering the PSA again until the 26th. And then we have to do scope and workshop stuff, you know what I mean, after that. We could get into a space where it's just not feasible. And I don't want to ask the district to rely on, you know, these things do take time to turn around. And so I want to make sure that we have the ability to do it successfully for them.
How long do you think it would take for Site Logic to prepare the revised PSA? Based on what we've talked about here today.
Yeah, we revised 3 items yesterday that Mary Ann had forwarded, so I mean, it doesn't take us long to revise the questions you have. My concern, and I agree with you that having your attorney review the PSA is a good thing. My concern is the time that it takes to do that.
Could we have I'm sure our attorney will get back to us as quickly as he can.
Yeah.
But after we hear from our attorney, we could schedule a special board meeting just for that business.
Right, yes. Right.
If we could do that on Tuesday or Wednesday next week. But I do agree, it would be nice to have a stamp of approval and support from our attorney.
at this time, then there's a suggested motion on our agenda. Hearing some of the comments though, if there is a motion to table, the approval of the service agreement, we would entertain that motion as well. Or whatever motion a board member would like to make. Not just my suggested ones.
I'd like to make a motion that we, upon delivery of the revised PSA, that the Sheboygan Area School Board, as soon as possible, schedule a special meeting to agree or to support or not support the PSA as written, and upon the input from our attorney.
So that would be tabling it from today.
Yes, essentially.
Is there support for that motion?
I'll support that.
Motion by Tim and supported by Matt. Is there any further discussion or conversation? Mrs. Bauer?
Mary Ann Ridings,
Yes.
Matt Malarchuk,
Yes.
Tim Tarjak,
Yes.
Julie Lohila.
Yes.
So we will get that review from our attorney and reschedule, and please, I'm sure that we could do something if we had questions at that special board meeting to reach you if you had availability.
Right.
We don't want you to feel that you need to make another trip here. We greatly appreciate all of the efforts that you've brought forth to this point. I know that you've been under pressure as well, so please pass along my apologies, but our gratitude for their patience with our district. At this time, I know that Matt has to leave around 11:45. I know at this point we aren't going to be, I don't believe, making any other motions, but if we'd like to still enter into some discussions as far as scope, I have some questions for the board. I know that your concern is, or maybe those above you, the concern about further work staffing without a signed PSA, so if you would like to head home, we completely understand that. We're probably gonna have some informal discussions.
Well, I will say that, we are here, right now, and, and we know time is gonna be of the essence. So, my question for you is, do you want us to stay and have more conversation, and maybe begin to talk about some of the scope and the priorities? Because that may make the work easier down the road. You know what I mean? Is if we wait too long and don't have any scope conversations now, again, I worry about the ability for us to meet your PQ deadlines.
Sure.
So if you're comfortable talking with us,
Yeah,
I
just
That's a great idea.
want to reiterate too, I'm assuming after our attorney reviews and all this stuff that we'll come to an agreement, so, I don't think it's this board's intention to not sign it.
Right.
Just, I think, have to do our due diligence as board members, and unfortunately, it keeps, pushing it down the road a little bit here, but I would think this would kind of be the last stop is before we would agree to it too.
Yeah, I would encourage, you have to leave at 45, right?
Mhm.
So if we got 40 minutes that we can, you're here. I know there's some big, kind of questions that probably we could benefit discussing in the next 40 minutes.
Okay, so thank you for your willingness
Yeah,
to stay.
absolutely.
I know for me personally, some of it is really just even still the larger scope of narrowing it down, because we've had, what I've heard at least, kind of 3 different main ideas, so I just kind of want to pull the board of where they're at. One is the extension or renovations of East Side. Well, I should say maybe 4. So it is putting into those, all of the buildings, the scope of work that was originally presented. Also, the second presentation of adding on to East Side, that additional wing. We've also had conversations of more of a one campus thought and how that would happen, and if we would be able to afford that situation. That one campus scenario in my mind is also broken down into two different segments, whether, you know, that means K-5 or K-6 at the intermediate middle school building, and some addition onto the high school that would allow 7-8 or 6-7-8 to be there with high school grades, but yet still in their own segmented section, or if that is some different configuration. So I just wanted to take some time to talk to the board about what your thoughts were, of what direction to pursue, to where we're able to really narrow this down, because we are on such a tight time frame to be able to accomplish this. So Matt, I'm gonna start with you, and you're just gonna
Okay.
break down the row.
All right, I'll keep it brief so we can move things along. I would be more in support of trying to find a way to have the one campus solution of adding on, because I think we have a lot of excess room at the high school, because that building used to house way more kids than was in there. And add on, you know, figure out some solution if that's possible. I just feel like East Elementary, that building is obsolete, and dumping money into an obsolete building, you know, in my opinion, it's like buying an old house. Things cost, they always go over your budget when you try to fix up an old house. So that's would be my thought. I'm open to listen to all ideas, but.
Julie?
I agree with Matt. I would like to see a one campus, but if it was a possibility, what the amount of that would be. Otherwise, I feel like the majority of the money really will go to East to renovate that building, and is it worth doing that to that building when there are needs in the other buildings also that we are, you know, not ignoring, because I'm sure Steve will be his job to figure out how he can fit that into the funds that we get come in without the bond. But if we could make one campus, I think that would, we might get a bigger bang for our buck. If it's even possible. I know a new building would be ultimately, that's what I would like you to do, is just, I'd like to build a whole new building. But I know that the price tag came in like at $47 million, so that's not an option.
Tim?
I think the only way to make this decision is we have to have more details than we have right now, because the thing that's gonna drive this is how much is this gonna cost and how much time it's gonna take. That's gonna dictate what we can do regardless of what we like. But the decision should be pretty easy once we get all the facts on the table. I've done a lot of work. I selected East Elementary because it was the most readily available and the easiest for me to comprehend what's going on there. My effort was to try and come up with a proposal that would help generate some more detailed numbers on what it would take to satisfy the requirements. What I don't know exactly, and we'd have to know from East Elementary or Deanna, is exactly what is the minimum improvements that we need there, realistic improvements to get them, you know, to where they need to be today. And with also with looking at future demands in mind with the enrollment possibly changing. So it may be premature at this point, but you know, I've worked it out on paper on what I would propose to do at East Elementary. And this is not saying, this is just trying to come up with some better visual suggestions of how it might be approached. It's not, you know, one versus the other. It's just to try on that part of the scope, more detail that would help us to make decisions.
So I also am more in favor of a one campus scenario, primarily for two reasons. One, for the same concerns that have been brought up by Matt and Julie in regards to the building at East. That may change my thought process once some more of the environmental studies are done at East Side, but those are the larger concerns I have with that building. But also, I just feel curriculum-wise and for our student body, and I think what we've struggled with in the past is the separation of K-2 from the rest of our elementary body, and that ideally those grade levels being together is what's best for them academically as well. So those are my two thought processes for why I prefer one campus scenario. Go ahead, Spencer.
Well, the only thing I have to add is, just to review the process of how we got here today, was really the discussion started off as to, we knew that our 2015 bond was going to be exhausted soon. So the first initial question was, we need to refund that bond, right? We need to extend it because we're at the tail end of our 2015 bond. So the first question that we asked the board was, do we want to extend the bond, right? And how much can we get if we extend it? With an understanding that by doing a tax neutral referendum, we had a 90% chance of passage. So the process began 4 or 5 months ago by saying, okay, if we extend this, what is it exactly that we need to fix, right? And you guys had supplied a lot of information, which I appreciate. Somewhere in that process, it went from fixing stuff to let's close down East Elementary and create a one campus scenario, which you guys have not necessarily kind of entertained that idea at all yet, right? I mean, how do we do that? But the other thing that we need to take into consideration, I'm almost certain that if we don't go with the tax neutral kind of let's extend our debt so that we can fix stuff. If we move away from that idea and we move towards shutting down East Elementary and adding on to our current campus, that's much more than $22 million. So now you need to understand that you're going from a potential 90% passage possibility to a 50% passage possibility. And if you don't get the 22 million, you may end up with nothing. And the 1.4 million that we have right now is going to be exhausted by, not this summer, but by next summer. And the bond, if it were to pass in August, just the extension, as you guys have already pointed out, those monies wouldn't be readily available until 2026, right? Summer of for construction.
Right.
Right. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware, and I'm fine with whatever the board and the community wants to do. I understand, and Deanna's here if you want to add to this at all. Deanna knows better than anybody here. East Side needs some help, right? And East Side, I've only been here 7 months, but working with Deanna and doing some informal observations and listening to these guys on the facility assessments, I would agree that if we just look for a tax extension, the majority of that money is going to have to go to East Side, right? And Tim, you brought up the fact, there's probably enrollment is going up, which is a good thing at East. Right now, I'm talking with Deanna. We're expected to add a second grade classroom. We're going to need it because of population going up. We're going to have to go from 4 sections to 5 sections. So there's a classroom we have to find for next year. I know the strategic planning process, it stated in there that we want to bring back pre-K. I thought maybe we might bring pre-K back at 2 sections. After talking with Deanna, she would be more interested in 4 sections, right? You think there's a need for
I think that there is a large need for preschool in our community, yes.
Right. So at least 2 sections, and you said you could easily fill 4, you think?
I'm just guessing, but
So-
I think that we would be able to fill 4.
If we do the math, 1 second grade, 4 sections of pre-K at the most, that's 5 classrooms that we don't have at East right now. So, what are we going to do? I mean, I've talked to Deanna and I right now are trying to figure out how can we find an extra classroom next year for 2nd grade. But we can't even entertain the strategic planning idea of adding a pre-K, we don't have rooms to put them in, right? So, I mean, I just wanna make sure everybody's on the same page, and maybe we need to talk about this a little bit, but the scope that they've been providing so far has been the idea of, we're gonna fix some stuff. We're gonna take probably the majority of the tax extension, fix up east, it'll be good for 15, 20 years. You can always entertain, I think every district wants to have a main campus, right? Every district I've worked in, if they're not there, they're always working towards that one campus idea, which is not a bad idea if you can get it done, but adding on, I just wanna make sure that we understand that by adding on and changing the scope, you're looking for a tax increase, right? Most likely.
If we were to move to one campus, is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
22 million is not gonna get,
So,
so, and I'm fine, I just wanna make sure
Right.
we're all on the same
Right.
page. I'm fine with whatever we decide, but we're taking a hard turn, right, away from what you guys have done, so I don't really think you guys have thought about the idea of how much is it gonna cost to shut down east and to possibly move, what is it, 300, how many students?
330 right now.
330 students to that campus. Ben, you have your hand up.
Just to add to that, because I kind of went through and did some of the numbers and looked at like the amount of classrooms we had. And I'm the same, like I would love to have one campus, but if you were to move all those kids to the intermediate middle school building, it wouldn't, and then move kids to the high school, it wouldn't be K6, it would have to be almost like K4. And you still wouldn't have enough because without preschool classrooms, you know what I mean?
Right.
So like then you'd almost have to move 5th through 7th to the high school. So then you'd have to have enough classrooms to support that. And then does the cafeteria at the high school support a 5 through 12? Like there's just a lot of other questions, you know, like I don't know that our building would support a K6, you know, and that's not including preschool. Just other things to think about.
Right.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I think that like the questions that you bring up, then that it just hasn't been fully explored yet.
Yeah.
You know, but that is, if it's not doable, and I've said this from the beginning, I have no issues with investing money and the bulk of the bond money into Eastside because it's much needed in that building. I think for me, it's just not been proven out that it's not possible to do a one campus situation. You know, we've had a brief design which was more adding on to the middle school, which we did mention prior, and I appreciate you grasping hold of that, but not potentially the high school building or like what that shift looks like, how many empty classrooms, if any, are at this building compared to the high school building. Like Spencer, in one of our previous meetings, you mentioned about, or maybe it was an email, the number of students the high school used to hold versus
Yes.
what it's holding now. So for me, it's not that I have a favorite scenario at this point, it's just that I don't have all of the information and it's not been proven out to us as a board that a one campus scenario isn't possible. Like we talked prior about a lot of the traffic concerns with the land that's available for sale behind the high school that the district is interested in purchasing, we would be able to alleviate those traffic concerns, and whether we move everyone there or not, I think is a wise situation to do. So that's just where I'm at as a board member, is that whatever we do right now, if we invest all of this money into Eastside, it's a good 20, 30 years down the road before we can justify to the community doing any kind of other situation. Like this is it. If we put money into this building, it's a generation plus from now before we think of doing anything else in our community.
And I don't disagree, and you're right. I mean, what was the population of the high school at its heyday? 800 and?
I graduated in 2005, there were 777. Years before that, it was even higher.
It was over 800 at its best. And they were able to house 800 students in that high school. Right now, we have 550.
557, I think.
Yeah. So that's potentially, you know, you're talking 250, you know, they used to be able to hold 250 students more. So I do believe that there's probably, and there's been some classrooms that I've noticed that have been repurposed in all the buildings, some of the classrooms have been turned into quasi offices and counseling and meeting rooms and stuff like that. I think, I agree, I don't think we fully have looked at the capacity of moving and how many, then the question becomes, well, okay, now that we have a firm grasp on the capacity, how many more classrooms do we need, right? And you're gonna need another gym. I know we've talked about that. I mean, it could be a scenario where you could add that gym to the current high school gym, extend it into the parking lot as we've discussed, and then potentially put classrooms around the gym and make, that could be an idea. But I think the key is, what is our current capacity? We're not quite certain of that. And then what exactly, how much space do we have to build? And I do think regardless of, just knowing, if you're building a gym and potentially classrooms somewhere, somehow, the other thing is obviously it's not gonna be a tax neutral, what we're asking for. We're gonna be asking for a lot more. And I do think, and maybe you guys can speak to this, and I think this is a big decision. I think if I've heard a lot of opinion from the board that, right now, before we even can determine what we want to do moving forward, I think the big question is, the fundamental question is, are we going to fix up east, or are we going to close east? And once that question is answered, that creates more of a clear path for them to do their work and for us. But we seem to be teeter-tottering back and forth between the idea of fixing up east and or trying to move to a one-campus scenario. So that is, I think that's the first thing we need to decide.
The other piece too is, and again, understand this is a tough decision, but new building, and if you wanna close east, we're not looking at an August 24 referendum
No,
anymore.
yeah,
It's
no.
down the road,
Yeah.
so.
Could we do it in May?
May of 25?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, most
If I could-
definitely,
Yeah.
most
May
definitely.
of
Well, we don't wanna go
25.
in November.
Right.
We
Yeah.
could possibly be ready for November, but that would be a bad date.
Yeah.
So if we're moving to closing east and.
Yeah.
And
And obviously, it sounds like you would need more time anyway to look
Right.
at everything, or we need more time, or,
Right. And then we'd be asking more, but, I guess at that time, the idea behind trying to ask for a tax extension and why we've been trying to kind of under pressure to do this in August and or if it doesn't pass in August and May is because May is the last date that we have to ask for a tax neutral extension. After May, everything is a tax increase. And from the perspective of the community, they just see it as a tax increase, right? They don't realize, well, we just got to break these bonds, this debt fell off. They get a little bit of a tax break in their tax bills. So anything after May, would be a tax increase anyways.
So I guess my question would be, and with just some of the preliminary things as far as classrooms and capacity, if administration, as well as John, thank you for being here today from food service, because, I think it was Ben brought up a great point about the cafeteria or the food situation as well, with a scenario like that. If we were to look at next week, like maybe a Thursday meeting to review the PSA, could we have preliminary numbers of capacity and those kind of situations by that meeting date where we could have further conversations of if this is possible, and if it's not, then we could decide on east and move along. Is that something that, I know you guys all have a lot on your plates already, so that's why I'm looking to you guys as administration and food service, what your thoughts are. If you could
So if I'm
look at
hearing you
your
correctly,
campuses.
Mary Ann, you're asking we can have a meeting next week, potentially with the administrators of the buildings, to talk about what that might look like and the availability, potential capacity.
Even if they just reported in, I'd be happy with
Okay.
that, if that's, and
Like-
I'm looking for admin from the high school and there's not one, so I'm like.
Would you want, so like enrollment numbers, but also the amount of classrooms we have, that kind of stuff?
I think classrooms and also like potential, like if something is a classroom, but if it's being used for something else,
Yeah.
this was a classroom, but we're using it for an office right now.
Yeah, so something like that.
I think too, we have to keep in mind that if east is growing, that means down the road that the other grade levels are also growing. So that's gonna move up into the high school. And also from 2000, and from, say from 2000, education has changed, and we have rooms in the high school that were not, you know, I started in education, we used big floppy disk in the classroom, we didn't have classroom, we didn't have computers, they weren't one-to-one. We didn't have those extra rooms because they weren't invented yet. So that has changed that building also, but I do think that we need to look at that building and see what are the class size numbers, are we running classes that we potentially shouldn't be running because the numbers are low within the classrooms. I've heard past that 15 students is a break-even place where we should never run a class with less than 15 students in it. So we need to look at those things too and see if we are utilizing that building to its capacity. And maybe we could move 6 and 7 up there and have a middle school through high school building. But we don't know those answers because we don't know what those, you know, what rooms are available, what they're using them for, and how education has changed throughout the years. That could be one reason why we have fewer students in them and filling up those rooms because of the change.
If I can offer a side commentary, just based on exactly what you're saying, that's why I'm interjecting. But I'm looking at something I've got on the side here. It's NCES data, which is a national data pool on school districts and enrollment. And you are right at the average with national data and class size enrollment per classroom. You're right, that's where you're at right now. Like I'm looking at the high school level, you're at 15.36 is the national average, you're at 16.54, right? So you're doing a good job with number of students per class. And staff supporting. So that's just for the moment.
Okay.
That's all that data is, and you've got to do your own capacity and utilization studies. So that makes a lot of sense.
And also throwing into the mix the thoughts of the more students you have in one place, the more crowded that feels, and opportunity for behaviors or other situations as well. So I think that we need to be mindful of that also moving forward.
And I think too, if that was indeed the path that the board decided to go down, I know we're investigating purchasing property that would allow us to maybe have a third outlet. But if the decision was made that we were gonna go to one campus, we most certainly would have to buy that property and start working towards a third outlet. Because right now, if you bring 330 bodies, especially at that age, where a lot of times it's the parents don't want to put a kid at that age on a bus, and they want to drive. If you take a look at the elementary in the morning, there are cars lined up down the road 20 minutes before school starts. So without a third outlet and adding 330 bodies, that would be difficult.
20 minutes is short. It was like an hour at the intermediate middle school building and parent pickup line.
Another point that's not easy to define is the enrollment fluctuation. Why is that happening? If, for instance, it's happening because in fact there is a migration of people from the cities to rural areas, then how do we find some sort of way to predict as best as possible what we might be seeing in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years up here?
We actually did, I don't know if you were here yet, Tim, but we did an enrollment study. We paid some folks to do that. So I can get you that data. But the projection was relatively small growth over time, but nothing, I mean, right now, so the elementary, you know, a few years ago, they had, it's K-1, 2, correct me if I'm wrong, Deanna, you had 4 sections of K-1, 2, essentially 12 classrooms a few years ago, and now it's kind of evolved, where now you have 5 sections of K and 1, right?
Yes.
And now you're gonna need 5, so essentially in the last few years, the elementary building K through 2 has went from four sections to now requiring 5 sections. So instead of 12 classrooms, we're gonna need 15 classrooms. And I don't know, and if we want to entertain adding a pre-K program, as we discussed in our strategic planning process, that definitely would require more classrooms as well. So that's if we don't go to a one campus idea, there's definitely, I think, a need for the idea that Site Logic came up with of adding that wing, and I think it was 4 or 5 classrooms, right? But I think at the time we were discussing and thinking about bringing 3rd grade down. Well, I don't think we would need to do that. What I think we would need to do is just add those classrooms to handle the current increase in enrollment and potentially add pre-K. So, but that's a good problem to have. I mean, if you've taken a look at the enrollment over time, I think it's been over 10 years, close to 15, where there's been a steady decline in enrollment here in Sheboygan. It's finally flattening out, and we're starting to actually see a little bit of an increase. And it wasn't, I don't think it was egregious decline. I mean, it was 15, 20 students a year, but it was for 10, 12 years in a row. So that's where some of these classrooms are opening up at the high school, right? Is because you had 800 and some, and that was 9 through 12, right, Ben? Pretty much. So that was, you had over 200 kids a class, back then when Ben went to school here. But now we're looking at probably a class average of about 125. So, and I don't suspect that you're going to see enrollment jump significantly, but I will tell you that all of us as administrators, and I think as teachers and educators, that's a good thing to have, that problem of increasing enrollment and turning that around from that steady decrease to hopefully a steady increase over the next few years, and bringing in more bodies brings in more revenue, which brings in more opportunities. So, but I don't think it's going to be anything that's mind-blowing enrollment increase. The biggest decrease is when what was the plant that closed?
The tissue plant.
Yeah, that was really the biggest dip in a very short period of time that Sheboygan suffered through. After that, it's been just minor decline.
Another wild card in this whole equation is CTE. From what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a very attractive program in Sheboygan, and kind of unique as far as statewide, and there's a lot of attention on it. And if that demand continues to increase, then you're not just talking about, I mean, we're already importing students from outside district, correct, that want to engage in that program?
Yes.
So if that demand increases, then the additional real estate, I mean, as far as, classroom space at the high school, you may need to look at, the demands that CTE may have for that, depending on how you want to expand the program.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we have one of the best CTE programs in northern Michigan. We have a lot of surrounding school districts that like to send their kids to us to take advantage of those classes. And, it's definitely a good thing. Again, attracting students from other school districts is something that we should be proud of, So.
Okay, moving forward, so we're going to gather data more for the one campus plat process. I know Tim has had some plats regarding East, which I apologize, Tim, I'm gonna ask you to hold off on just due to the time. What do you need from us in regards to if we were to move forward with an east side expansion? What can we provide to you? What do you need from us? Or just for the project as a whole, like further definitions of, I know Steve has provided some thoughts as to what he can do outside of needing a construction project manager for. Do we need to go through those? Has he already gone through that with you?
No, that'd be great information to have.
Okay.
I guess Rebecca, I might lean on you as far as some of these new thoughts of building on additions to the high school as well. Maybe you're looking for roughly how many classrooms could be retained and used for talked about obtaining data surrounding all of this, so, just some information that I can provide right now. I just ran a scenario with the numbers that we currently have, utilizing that $37.4 million for the addition. I think it's safe to say that that's roughly the square footage that you would be looking at. You might be able to save a little bit, utilizing some other classrooms. But if we take all of Steve's non-negotiable bins, as we called them, throughout the district, removed everything at the elementary school for repairing that, and then added in the elementary school addition, the total for that scenario that we're looking at is $44.6 million. And so again, there may be some potential savings as far as square footage of the additions if you're splitting up for the middle school and the high school, but with that square footage that we have right now, that's the value that we're coming up with. So just important information to consider.
So let me see if I'm understanding you correctly, from the scenario that we've been discussing, which includes expansion of East, improvements of East, and fixing everything else, that cost is less than $20 million, right? To do the high needs that we've been talking about.
There was a 14.7 million high needs infrastructure.
Right.
That did not include an addition to East.
Okay, so that was just fixing stuff
That
that
was
needs
just
to be
fixing
fixed.
everything.
But if we were to move to this one campus scenario, instead of talking about $15 million, we're talking about $47 million?
Yeah, the price that he.
Why not share this if that works?
Yeah.
We can have a breakout of all of that.
I think at our last workshop, each of the board members were asked if we wanted to have no mill or have an increase, and every one of us said no mill.
Well, I said no mill's more realistic, but what we need is.
Right, and I agree with that too. We need more, but are we able to get more from our community is the question, and we really need to get.
So we talked about asking two questions too at one time. We talked about asking for a neutral tax extension, right? But then also if we were looking at a one campus and a lot of construction, we could potentially ask a second question for that. Is that correct, Pete?
You could, you just have, if you ask more than one question, they have to be able to stand on their own. So you couldn't ask a question that says, if you ask this, we're gonna fix up East, and if we do this, we're gonna close East, because they can't, they can't stand alone.
Right.
So you have to identify.
So the first one would have to be exclude any construction or extension to East. It would have to be just for that 14.7 kind of fix them up stuff.
Sure.
And then the second question then, if passed, would be
Right.
to.
It could be, yes.
Could be.
It could be. I would just add, well, Chris has got some, one thing to consider too is there, I think the high school and the intermediate building are buildings you're looking to maintain for the long term, regardless. And there are, I believe, some non-negotiables that Steve has identified in terms of, things that need to be fixed there. That's another avenue to, as you continue to look at like utilization studies and the development of one campus, and that's gonna take some time, for sure. And we know at some point, to do that, it's gonna be asking your community for a tax increase. But is there an opportunity in the short term, because if you mentioned, Spencer, you're gonna be out of dollars available to maintain your facilities after next year.
Yes.
Is there an opportunity to extend your tax neutral opportunity, maybe not as far out as we were talking, but to still be able to do some of your major needs in some of these buildings that you are looking to keep long term? And I'll use like the track as another one. You said the track needs to be fixed. And sooner than later is probably better for that. Just to consider that opportunity. You could ask multiple questions, but you also could move forward with a tax neutral opportunity for the amount of whatever you say, hey, these are immediate needs, these are things that these two buildings we know are going to need done regardless of what our plan is. And then continue that work on the one campus, knowing that at some point you're going to have to ask your community for an increase anyway. You know what I mean? But not just foregoing any opportunity at your tax neutral, just to ask, you know what I mean? It's how do you maintain what you have now and you know you're gonna need long-term, and do that wisely and conservatively, because as Matt has said, costs are only gonna go up to fix some of those things. And then we could continue to help you with, utilization studies and, what that would take to get to one campus, and that could kind of be, you'd almost look at like a phased approach to, hey, let's do what we do now, and then let's keep planning for the future, knowing it could take us a year or two to get there.
The other situation for me, like the high school building has a courtyard area that is not currently being used. They don't utilize it at their lunch times, so I think really it's only a before and after school scenario for them. Like, could that be enclosed in? Before when we looked at that, I think it had space for 4 classrooms, if I'm not mistaken, if that were to be enclosed. But just a situation like that where it's already, you have 4 exterior walls, like what would it take? And you're not building a whole new wing, but you have a capacity potentially for 3-4 classrooms in that space. So those are the other questions that I would have in regards to when we're looking at building capacity, taking something that doesn't necessarily involve a full wing, but making it into a useful space.
Yeah, I think there's more room for growth if you were to add on to the high school more so. We were previously looking mostly at the intermediate school, trying to add on to
I
that.
agree with you.
But I think the high school has more, not just the courtyard, but the way that it's built with the wings that we currently have. I think you could join multiple classrooms pretty easily.
But that might be one situation where you could gain some space and a more phased approach without having a full, extra wing. Okay, we have about 4 minutes, so I'm gonna give preference to Chris. You were pulling the information up. Did you still wanna share on?
Yeah, just really quick, again, just a point of reference here. So when we look at the different scenarios, scenario 1 here is the list that we identified with Steve following the first workshop meeting. We called them non-negotiables or critical infrastructure PIMs, and this is kind of what Steve had said, this needs to be done. And that totaled 14.7 million. The second scenario that we had was the latest list that we shared, and that included the additional 5 classrooms at East Elementary School, including renovating that. And then this last scenario that I put together in scenario 4, I just did as we were talking, and if we notice, all of these values match Steve's, not that one, these all match Steve's non-negotiable list. And what we did is we replaced the non-negotiables at the elementary school with a new building addition. And that is what totals the $44.6 million that I was referencing.
The new building at the intermediate high school area.
Correct,
So-
yeah.
That would create that K-12.
So you're saying adding the wing, or adding the classrooms to east would be approximately $14 million?
From scenario 1 to 2.
That would be
Yeah.
latest list.
That's the latest list. That, you're talking the proposed front addition, which is the safe and secure entry versus adding the 5 classrooms.
Well, just like what's the difference between the 5.4 million and 19.3,
Yeah.
new classrooms?
So that's kind of the latest list that was out
That's the
circulating
east side
here.
edition.
I just feel like $14 million, like, I think there's other alternatives. Man, that's just a lot of money for 5 classrooms.
Could you go back to the last slide, please?
Yeah.
So I think what Matt is saying, if you take a look at scenario 1 in the latest list,
Yep,
there's a difference there. And where the assumption being that the difference would be the additional wing, right? Between scenario 1 and the latest list, if you take a look at east side, it's projected a little over 5 million. But if we're gonna renovate it, it's over 19 million.
Right, which is more than 5 classrooms. It's a safe, secure entry, so that's the admin and the health office coming to the front. It's providing the connection, which would then create a media center space, because I know that there's a lot of constriction in the space allocation. It provides faculty resource space. It provides special education resource. And these pieces also came from your survey. that came out, which were identified as needs for your district, so it's really supporting that. Also, it's recognizing what you're saying, Spencer, of our PK program in early childhood is really, and that is a true statement, is supporting those younger ages, really creating the right atmosphere and resources, right? So that it's taking your existing space of the administration office and embracing that with that full wing and creating those first year programs and using the existing you have great existing infrastructure there with restrooms in all the classrooms. And it's just creating that wing of early childhood education. It's also making that which was really great from Diana, the suggestion of lowering the stage, improving the PE program, and when the students are in the cafeteria, providing restrooms there. So just making it a school that is more supportive. I mean, there's probably more that we need to do, but it's providing that estimate of supporting that long-term vision of your district. And so it's more than the 5 classrooms.
But we don't have $19 million, because if we get 22 and we give you 18.5%, that leaves us like with 18 basically, so we wouldn't even be able to do that though. And then we would be able to do nothing anywhere
Well,
else.
I just wanted to provide the clarification
I know
with it.
what I'm,
Yeah, so Matt, to answer your question, everything that's in bold on this slide is what was added from Steve's scenario there.
Okay.
So it's more than just that classroom addition, it's all of these accessibility, facility improvement measures, the addition itself for the classrooms, the 5 classrooms, was about $5 million. For the entire addition up front was like $10.5 million. But when we look at the difference between
Not you, I was
Oh.
looking at him too, sorry.
when we look at the difference between Steve's non-negotiable list and that second one that we were referencing here, this is everything that was included in there, so it is more than just that.
So I just wanted to clarify, to make the renovations needed at East would cost what, 5.4 million or?
Just the major infrastructures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So I guess what would be if I were to, because looking at your numbers there, it appears like Matt did the math, 14 million difference between scenario and the latest list. But then when you go to scenario 4, where you've bumped it to 35, that's based on the square footage if we were to add it to the intermediate or middle school, or high school, right?
Correct.
So you're looking at, 14 million or 30 million in regards to creating space, the difference between the two. Does that make sense? Is that a reasonable?
Latest list creates space, just like you said.
Right.
But that would be a $14 million difference, yeah.
Right.
As well as addressing, again, more than just creating space, you're,
Yeah, all those other
all of the
issues as well.
accessibility, ADA
Okay.
concerns.
Could you come up with that 28 million by going out in years or not? Like, you said,
You could get close, you could probably get close.
But again, that would be
Yeah.
that 28 million you're looking at in this scenario here. Yes, that, like Pete said, you would be close, you would be addressing your critical infrastructure funds, and you would also be creating the additional space at your existing elementary school site there.
Do we have this information already?
Yeah, so what you have is this entire list, that shows, the PIN code, the short description, and then you have, the expanded description, so this gives detail as to what's included in that facility improvement measure, a quick description of the existing conditions, and then you can see life expectancy, actual life, remaining life, our assessment of it, and then all of that, kind of on your far right side would be the price, so you guys can look
This
through,
what this is.
that's what that printout
And
is.
there's little X's on the left there, you can tell what scenario they're in, so scenario 1 or 2.
Again,
If they're included.
I did scenario 4 just now as we've been sitting here, but scenario 1 would be Steve's non-negotiable as scenario 2 is the latest list that was floating around in the email a couple weeks ago.
Is it
And the only-
possible, I apologize to interrupt, but we have to close up, so, is it possible to have this emailed as well? Mostly just because I can't read it.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is,
It's electronic, yeah.
So send it electronically, that would be appreciated greatly. Ben, I apologize to you as well, but if you would like to see me afterwards, I'd be happy to take your input and pass it along to the rest of the board.
We'll do that.
For board members, are you all available Thursday, the 22nd, and Spencer as well?
I will be gone, at COP ESD Superintendent Retreat on Thursday.
Okay.
I'll be leaving actually Wednesday night for that. So I'm available Monday and Tuesday, but I mean, if you guys need to get together and talk, and we can get all 7 board members together, I think that's most important.
I was only looking at Thursday to give opportunity for the attorney's review to get back to us in an appropriate time frame. So are we comfortable without Spencer here?
I wouldn't be able,
Oh, you
well,
don't?
I might be able by 6 AM, because there's a little bit of surgery on that day, but it's just, I might have to.
I can do Thursday. There's full basketball games Monday, Wednesday, and Friday next week.
Yeah. All
But
right,
if it was
let's,
at 6:30, I would be back by 4:30.
all right, let's plan on Thursday, February the 22nd at 6:30. I will talk to Amber and ask if her availability as well as Carmela and Dennis and Sue have her do the special order meeting paperwork for you. That will hopefully give us time to get our attorney review, get that back to you for any revisions necessary there, as well as the tax deduction portion also.
I think Amber will be okay, because in the committee meeting, I was thinking of her, she said this week Thursdays after 5, she would be okay.
Perfect.
And Dennis, I think Dennis might be, because he said he was just busy Monday and Wednesday, so both of them might be available as well.
I greatly appreciate, I know this took a turn more for you guys, but I greatly appreciate your willingness to be here and work through some situations with us. At this time, we'd like to open up to any public comment. Hearing none. I'm gonna wait a moment for Tim. Tim's important to this vote.
I was just gonna point out that scenario 4, that east price, on your matrix there, it's option C on the East Elementary School, even though it goes to that campus. I was thinking about it as grade level, right? So that grade level then. So there's like option A, B, and C. That's it, just helping you navigate that. That's it.
Couldn't wait.
That's okay. We just can't vote without you.
More information.
All right. So while you were gone, there was no public comment, Tim, but at this time, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Support.
Moved by Matt and supported by Tim. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.